I remember the exact moment I realized I should not have gone inside that house, but by then it already felt like leaving was no longer entirely up to me, and the unsettling part is that nothing about the place seemed obviously dangerous at first, it just felt wrong in a way I could not explain. That evening, I had driven nearly an hour away from the main city, chasing the idea of finding an abandoned location to explore, something I had done multiple times before without any real issues, and the house stood alone at the end of a narrow dirt path, surrounded by dry, lifeless trees that barely moved even when the wind passed through. From a distance, it looked like any other abandoned structure, broken windows, faded walls, and a front door slightly open, creaking softly as if it had been left that way for years. But the moment I stepped out of my car, I noticed something that made me pause: the silence. It was too complete, no insects, no distant sounds, nothing at all, just a heavy stillness pressing in from all sides, like the place was cut off from the rest of the world. I tried to ignore it, convincing myself it was just because of how remote the area was, and slowly made my way toward the house, my footsteps sounding louder than they should have against the dry ground. When I reached the entrance, I hesitated for a moment, not out of fear exactly, but because the air inside felt different, colder and heavier, carrying a faint damp smell mixed with something metallic that lingered in the back of my throat. I pushed the door open, and the creaking sound echoed deeper into the house than I expected, as if the interior space stretched farther than what I had seen from outside. The first room was mostly empty, with broken furniture scattered across the floor, everything covered in a thick layer of dust that had clearly not been disturbed in years, except for one detail that immediately caught my attention: faint drag marks cutting through the dust, uneven lines leading toward a dark hallway at the back. I crouched down to examine them, running my fingers just above the surface, and the edges looked too clean, too recent, like something had been moved not long before I arrived. That should have been enough to make me leave, but instead I convinced myself that someone else must have been there earlier, maybe other explorers, and I decided to keep going. As I stepped into the hallway, the light from outside faded quickly, and the atmosphere shifted, the air feeling tighter, heavier, like the walls were closing in slightly. I began noticing small things that did not seem right: a door slightly open even though there was no wind inside, a picture frame hanging crooked on the wall, and then a faint sound from somewhere deeper within the house, a slow dragging noise, like something being pulled across the floor. I froze and listened carefully, trying to locate where it was coming from, but it stopped almost immediately, leaving me standing in complete silence again. I stayed there for a few seconds, debating whether to continue or leave, but curiosity pushed me forward despite the growing unease. At the end of the hallway, I entered a larger room where a single chair sat in the center, facing directly toward the doorway. What made it disturbing was not the chair itself, but the fact that it was not covered in dust like everything else. Its surface looked recently disturbed, as if someone had been sitting there not long ago. I slowly walked around it, my eyes scanning the room, and that was when the feeling started, the unmistakable sensation of being watched, like something was just outside my field of vision, observing me without making a sound. I turned back toward the hallway, deciding I had seen enough, but before I could take a step, I heard it again, the dragging sound, this time closer, clearer, moving slowly and deliberately. I stepped into the hallway and immediately noticed something that made my chest tighten: new marks in the dust, fresh ones that had not been there before, leading directly toward the room I had just left. The realization hit me instantly: something had moved while I was inside that room, something I had not seen. That was the moment fear finally took over, and I turned to leave without hesitation, but as I walked back down the hallway, something felt wrong. The distance seemed longer, the light from the entrance dimmer than it should have been, and the layout did not feel the same. I kept moving, faster now, but the hallway seemed to stretch, doors appearing where I did not remember them, corners that did not exist before, and all the while the silence remained, broken only by the faint sound of something moving behind me. At first, I refused to turn around, telling myself it was just my imagination, but the sound grew closer, matching my pace, until I could not ignore it anymore. When I finally looked back, I saw movement at the far end of the hallway, a low shape, partially hidden in shadow, shifting just enough to confirm it was real. Panic took over, and I ran, my footsteps echoing loudly as I moved forward, trying to find the exit, but then I heard it clearly: another set of footsteps behind me, not human, not quite right, but keeping perfect pace with mine. I reached a door and forced it open, stumbling into another room, and for a brief moment I thought I had escaped, until I saw the chair again, placed exactly as before, facing the doorway, as if the house had folded in on itself and brought me back to the same place. That was when the realization truly set in. This was not just an abandoned house, something about it was alive in a way I could not understand, and it was not letting me leave. The footsteps stopped just outside the doorway, and the silence returned, heavier than before, almost suffocating, like something was standing just out of sight, waiting. I slowly backed away, my eyes fixed on the entrance, expecting something to appear, but nothing did, and then I noticed something that made everything worse. The chair had shifted slightly, turning just enough to face me more directly, even though I had not seen it move. That was enough to break whatever control I had left, and I turned and ran again, ignoring everything, pushing forward until I finally saw a faint outline of the front door ahead. I rushed toward it and forced it open, stumbling outside into the open air, not stopping until I reached my car. I got in and drove away immediately, my hands shaking, my heart racing, trying to convince myself that it had all been fear, confusion, anything that made sense. But later that night, when I reviewed the footage from my camera, I saw something that I had completely missed at the time. In the reflection of a broken mirror I had passed in the hallway, there was a shape behind me, low to the ground, moving silently, following every step I took. And the worst part was that it never disappeared. Even when I left the house, even when I reached my car, it was still there in the frame, just barely visible, like it had followed me out. Since that night, I have never gone back to that area, but sometimes, late at night, when everything around me goes completely silent, I feel that Sammy heavy stillness again, and I cannot shake the feeling that whatever was in that house did not stay there. I should have left the moment I realized the forest had gone completely silent, but by then it already felt like something had noticed me, and the worst part is I still cannot explain exactly when that feeling started, only that it slowly replaced every logical thought in my head until fear was the only thing left. I had planned the trip for weeks, a simple solo camping experience far away from the city, somewhere quiet where I could clear my mind, and after hours of driving, I found a spot deep in a wooded area where the road faded into a narrow dirt trail surrounded by tall, dense trees that blocked out most of the sky. It was late afternoon when I arrived, the sun still visible through gaps in the branches, casting long shadows across the uneven ground, and everything seemed normal at first, calm even, the kind of peaceful isolation I had been looking for. I set up my tent near a small clearing, not too far from where I had parked, and spent some time gathering wood for a fire, moving around confidently, completely unaware of how different that same place would feel just a few hours later. As the sun began to set, the forest changed in a way that felt subtle at first, the light fading faster than I expected, the shadows growing darker and deeper, stretching between the trees in ways that made the space feel less open. I lit a small fire and sat beside it, listening to the faint sounds of nature, distant rustling, occasional movement in the underbrush, nothing unusual, just the normal sounds you expect in a place like that. But then, slowly, those sounds started to disappear, one by one, until there was nothing left. I remember noticing it clearly, the exact moment the last sound faded, leaving behind a silence so complete it felt unnatural, like the forest itself had stopped breathing. I told myself it was just nighttime settling in, that animals had moved deeper into the woods, but that explanation did not feel right, and the longer I sat there, the more aware I became of how exposed I was, sitting alone in the middle of that clearing with nothing but darkness beyond the reach of the firelight. I tried to distract myself, focusing on simple tasks, checking my gear, adjusting the tent, anything to keep my mind from drifting, but every few seconds I found myself looking out into the trees, feeling like something was just beyond what I could see. At some point, I noticed footprints near the edge of the clearing, faint impressions in the dirt that I was sure had not been there before. They were not clear enough to identify, but they looked recent, leading from the trees toward where I had set up camp, then stopping abruptly as if whoever or whatever had made them had simply vanished. I crouched down to examine them, my heart beating faster without any real reason, and tried to convince myself they were mine, maybe from earlier when I had been gathering wood, but the direction did not match, and the shape felt wrong somehow, slightly longer, slightly uneven. I stood up quickly and looked around, but everything remained still, the trees motionless, the darkness beyond them thick and impenetrable. I decided to ignore it, telling myself I was overthinking, and went back to the fire, but the feeling did not leave. It grew stronger as the night deepened, turning into something heavier, something that made every small movement feel significant, every shift in the shadows feel deliberate. After a while, I heard something, a soft sound coming from the forest, like a step on dry leaves, so faint I almost dismissed it, but then it came again, slightly closer this time. I held my breath and listened, trying to pinpoint where it was coming from, but the sound stopped as soon as I focused on it, leaving me in that same suffocating silence. I stayed still for a long moment, telling myself it was just an animal, something small moving through the underbrush, but deep down I knew it did not sound like that. There was a rhythm to it, a pause between each movement that felt intentional. I stood up slowly and grabbed my flashlight, aiming it toward the trees, sweeping the beam across the darkness, but it did not reach far, the light swallowed quickly by the dense forest. For a few seconds, everything seemed normal again, and I almost felt relief, until I noticed something that made my stomach drop, two faint reflections deeper in the trees, low to the ground, catching the edge of the light for just a moment before disappearing. I froze, staring into that spot, trying to see it again, but there was nothing, just darkness. I backed away slowly, returning to the fire, but now my mind was racing, trying to process what I had seen, trying to find a logical explanation that made sense. I told myself it was an animal, it had to be, but the way it had disappeared did not match anything I had experienced before. I decided to go inside the tent, convincing myself I would feel safer there, but even as I zipped it closed, I knew it was just a thin layer of fabric separating me from whatever was out there. I lay down, trying to calm myself, listening to my own breathing, but after a few minutes, I heard it again, the same soft footsteps, circling slowly around the tent. They were faint, careful, as if whatever was making them was trying not to be heard, and that realization made it worse, because it meant it was aware of me. I stayed completely still, not even daring to move, as the footsteps continued, stopping occasionally, then resuming, always just outside the tent. I tried to convince myself it was just curiosity, an animal investigating the camp, but then something happened that shattered that thought completely. I heard the sound of something dragging lightly across the side of the tent, slow and deliberate, tracing along the fabric from one end to the other. My entire body tensed, and I held my breath, listening as the sound repeated, slightly higher this time, as if whatever was outside was adjusting its position. I could feel my heart pounding so hard it almost hurt, and in that moment, I realized I was not dealing with something normal. I reached for my flashlight and turned it on, pointing it toward the tent wall, but the light only illuminated the thin fabric, revealing nothing beyond it. The dragging stopped instantly, and the silence returned, heavier than before. I waited, counting the seconds in my head, hoping it had left, but then I heard it again, this time closer, right beside me, followed by a slow, almost careful pressure against the side of the tent, like something leaning in. I could see a faint distortion in the fabric, a shape forming from the outside, low and elongated, but not clearly defined, and for a brief second, I thought I saw it move upward slightly, as if it was trying to stand. Panic took over, and I grabbed my knife, holding it tightly, even though I knew it would not be enough if whatever was out there decided to come in. The pressure against the tent increased slightly, then stopped, and the shape disappeared just as suddenly as it had appeared. I did not wait to understand it, I unzipped the tent and ran, grabbing only my flashlight, not caring about anything else, just needing to get to my car. As I ran through the clearing, I heard it behind me, not loud, not fast, but moving, keeping pace in a way that felt controlled, deliberate. I did not look back at first, but the sound grew closer, and when I finally turned, I saw movement between the trees, something low, shifting quickly from one shadow to another, never fully visible, but always there. I reached my car and got inside, locking the doors immediately, my hands shaking so badly I could barely start the engine, and for a moment, everything went silent again. I looked out through the windshield, scanning the trees, trying to see it, but there was nothing, just darkness. Then, slowly, I noticed something on the ground near the front of the car, a set of footprints leading toward me, deeper and clearer than the ones I had seen earlier, and they stopped just a few feet away from the hood, as if whatever had made them was standing there, just out of sight. I drove away without looking back, not stopping until I reached the main road, and even then, I did not feel safe. Later, when I checked my gear, I realized something I could not explain. The footprints I had seen near my tent were not just around it, they were leading into it as well, as if something had already been inside before I ever zipped it closed, and sometimes now, when I think back to that night, I cannot shake the feeling that I was never alone out there, not even for a second. I knew it wasn't an animal the moment it stopped moving exactly when I did, because animals don't think like that, they don't wait, they don't mirror you, and they definitely don't stay completely silent when they're only a few meters away in dry leaves that should be impossible to move through quietly. The whole thing started as a simple late afternoon hike, something I used to do often to clear my head, and that day I had chosen a forest trail that was far enough from the main road to feel isolated but still familiar enough that I didn't expect any real danger. The sky had been overcast since morning, a dull gray that filtered the sunlight into something dim and flat, making it harder to tell how much time was passing, but I wasn't paying much attention to that at first. I parked my car near the trail entrance and started walking, following a narrow path that wound deeper into the woods, surrounded by tall trees that blocked out most of the horizon, their branches hanging low enough to make the space feel enclosed. At the beginning, everything felt normal, the usual sounds of the forest, distant birds, leaves shifting under small movements, the occasional snap of a twig, but as I continued walking, those sounds began to thin out, gradually fading in a way that I didn't immediately notice until it was almost complete. I remember stopping at one point and realizing how quiet it had become, not completely silent, but close enough that every small sound I made seemed louder than it should have been. I told myself it was just the time of day, that animals had moved deeper into the forest, but there was something about it that felt off, like the environment itself had changed in a way I couldn't fully understand. I kept walking, trying to ignore that feeling, focusing on the path ahead, but after a while I started to notice something else, faint impressions in the dirt beside the trail, footprints that didn't quite match anything I could recognize. They were too narrow to be from a typical animal, but too irregular to be clearly human, and they appeared sporadically, sometimes alongside the path, sometimes cutting across it, always leading deeper into the woods. I crouched down to get a closer look, tracing one of the prints with my eyes, and something about the spacing felt wrong, like whatever had made them didn't move in a consistent pattern. I stood up quickly, brushing it off as just uneven ground or overlapping tracks, but the thought stayed with me as I continued forward. The deeper I went, the darker it seemed to get, even though it was still technically daytime, the thick canopy above blocking more and more light until everything around me took on a muted, shadowed tone. I checked my phone for the time, but the signal was gone, which wasn't unusual for that area, but it added to the growing sense of isolation. That was when I heard the first sound that didn't belong, a soft step behind me, light but distinct, like something placing its weight carefully to avoid making noise. I turned immediately, scanning the trees, but there was nothing there, just the same stillness stretching in every direction. I waited for a few seconds, listening, and when nothing happened, I convinced myself it was just something small, maybe a branch settling or a distant movement echoing strangely. I turned back and kept walking, but now I was more aware, more alert, every sense focused on the space around me. After a few minutes, I heard it again, another step, slightly closer this time, and I stopped instantly. The sound stopped too. That was the first moment it really felt wrong, the way the sound responded to me, like it wasn't random, like it was aware of what I was doing. I stood there for a long moment, barely breathing, listening for anything else, but the forest remained completely still. Slowly, I started walking again, and after a few steps, I heard it once more, matching my pace, stopping when I stopped, moving when I moved. My heart started to race, and I told myself it had to be an animal, something cautious, something following out of curiosity, but even as I thought it, I knew it didn't fit. Animals don't mimic movement like that, they don't stay perfectly in sync. I picked up my pace slightly, and the sound did the same, always just behind me, always just out of sight. I didn't turn around this time, I didn't want to see it, I didn't want to confirm what I was starting to suspect. Instead, I focused on getting back to the trail entrance, but as I looked ahead, I realized something that made my stomach drop, the path didn't look familiar anymore. The turns felt different, the spacing between trees didn't match what I remembered, and there was no clear sign of the direction I had come from. I tried to stay calm, telling myself I must have taken a wrong turn, but the deeper I looked, the more disoriented I felt, like the forest had subtly shifted around me without me noticing. The footsteps behind me continued, steady, controlled, never getting closer, but never falling behind either. At some point, I forced myself to turn around, needing to see what was there, and for a brief second, I caught movement between the trees, something low and dark, slipping behind a trunk just as I focused on it. It wasn't fast, not like a startled animal, it moved deliberately, almost carefully, like it knew exactly how much of itself to reveal. I stared into that spot, waiting for it to move again, but nothing happened. The silence returned, heavier than before. I turned back and started walking faster, almost jogging now, my breathing uneven, my thoughts racing, trying to make sense of what was happening. The footsteps followed, still matching me, still just out of sight, and every time I slowed down, they slowed too, as if whatever it was had no intention of letting me out of its awareness. Then I noticed something ahead that made everything worse, a clearing, small but open enough to break the line of trees, and in the center of it, something was standing. At first, I couldn't make out what it was, just a shape, darker than the surrounding shadows, but as I got closer, I realized it was wrong in a way I couldn't describe. It wasn't moving, but it didn't look still either, like it was holding itself in place unnaturally. I stopped at the edge of the clearing, my entire body tense, and the footsteps behind me stopped too. For a moment, everything was completely silent again. Then, slowly, the shape in the clearing shifted, not stepping, not turning, but adjusting slightly, like it was reorienting itself toward me. That was when I understood, whatever had been following me wasn't behind me anymore. It was in front of me now. I took a step back without thinking, and as I did, I heard movement again, not from behind this time, but from somewhere off to the side, like there was more than one, or like it had moved without me seeing it. Panic took over, and I turned and ran, not caring about direction anymore, just moving as fast as I could through the trees, branches hitting against me, the ground uneven beneath my feet. The footsteps followed instantly, no longer careful, no longer quiet, but still controlled, still matching my pace in a way that felt intentional. I didn't look back again, I couldn't, I just kept running until I saw a break in the trees ahead, the faint outline of the trail entrance, and I pushed myself toward it with everything I had left. When I finally reached my car, I got inside and locked the doors immediately, my hands shaking as I tried to start the engine. For a moment, everything was still again, the forest silent, empty, like nothing had ever been there. I looked out through the windshield, scanning the tree line, trying to see any movement, but there was nothing, just darkness between the trunks. Then I noticed something on the ground near the edge of the clearing, footprints, the same ones I had seen earlier, but clearer now, more defined, and they weren't just scattered randomly anymore, they formed a pattern, a path leading in a wide circle around where I had been standing. As I stared at them, trying to process what they meant, I felt something I cannot fully explain, a realization that hit me all at once. Those footprints weren't following me through the forest, they had been surrounding me the entire time. I drove away as fast as I could, not stopping until I reached the main road, and even then I kept checking the rearview mirror, expecting to see something there. I never went back to that place, but sometimes, when I walk alone and the world suddenly goes quiet for no reason, I slow down without meaning to, and for a split second, I feel it again, that same presence, matching me, step for step, just out of sight, waiting for me to notice.